Now I continue inviting our distinguished key speaker, Dr. Moore, Professor of Education, Emeritus at the Pennsylvania State University. He is well known for his theory of distance learning as a transactional distance learning, and also he is a founder of the American Journal of Distance Education. The title of his presentation is "How does the decision of implementing distance education in an educational system affect A, teachers, B, the teaching process, C, the interactions between all participants and stakeholders, D, organizations and educational activities in school, E, infrastructures and equipment, and F, training of teachers." Welcome, Professor Moore.
Good morning or good evening.
Okay.
Is everything okay?
Is everything here okay? You can begin with the speech, please.
Okay. So you're ready for me now, yes?
100%.
Okay. First, good morning, as I said, here from the United States, and good evening to you in Greece. I'm glad to join you, but I wish I could be there. I've been in Greece many times, in Rhodos and Crete and Kos and of course Athens. I'm really happy to have this opportunity of joining your very important conference. And might I say congratulations to the University of Aegean for setting up this important conference. July 2020, in all our countries, the world is in turmoil as we try to deal with this coronavirus pandemic. And we're all thinking about the future, how it's going to change our living and our travel and our healthcare, and of course for people in this conference, how it's going to change the educational system from school, preschool, from the littlest children to the doctorate level of education. And I want to start by thinking what all these levels of education have in common. And I think we all recognize the classroom. Little children, big children, adults in the classroom. We see the teacher. You can see the teacher, the person who's talking, writing on the chalkboard, directing the discussion, answering questions. So the question I want to start is, what is the teacher? Everybody here knows the answer to that. The teacher is the person who has knowledge, who's planned what to teach and communicates what he knows, talking to the students, or in the case of the university professor, giving a lecture. The teacher might have planned a discussion, might have planned a test to evaluate progress. and might even have time to listen to the problems of an individual student. There are many problems, because if there are 30 people in a class, there are 30 different individuals, and they've all got their different needs. And of course, no teacher can get around to all of them, but we'll come to that later. Now, that was all last year. Now, the classroom is empty. Education has come to a halt. Fortunately, there is another picture, what we might call a 21st century picture. This is a student at home. Sitting at his laptop, where he has signed on to the online management system, learning management system, on his school website. That's the website of the course that I was teaching until recently, when I retired from teaching at our university. He's got the learning objectives in the syllabus. He's got the reading in the library resource. He's going to listen to a podcast, to watch a film on YouTube, meet other students on Zoom, meet the teacher face to face, in FaceTime, I'm sorry. He's going to go into the forest to do a project. He's going to go to school one day to take part in a laboratory experiment. He's going to write a weekly test assignment. He's going to include a video that he made in the forest, which he's going to send for evaluation on the course website after he's reviewed the feedback from the teacher on his previous assignment. That's distance education, learning and teaching anywhere, anytime. Teachers and students are linked by communication technology. Distance education is not a copy of the traditional class. The focus here is on the individual student. In fact, distance education used to be called independent learning, and nowadays many people talk about personalized learning. The online management system focuses on the individual's needs and attributes, focuses on the individual, each student individually. It allows the student to manage more of his own study. It allows self-testing and repeated attempts to meet performance criteria. The student himself can set up discussions, has a personal choice of audio and video and reading resources. And all this focus on personalized learning today is being reinforced by emerging technology that is primarily machine learning, learner analytics, and artificial intelligence. This anywhere, anytime form of education, anywhere, anytime. The most obvious characteristic being communication technology, and importantly, focus on individual needs and needs of the individual learner. This is a renewal of an interest that's been quite common in the last 10 years in what's been referred to as blended learning. Some people refer to the flipped classroom, where students use online materials to learn what is traditionally learned by attending lectures, and then class time is used for interactive group learning. So instead of the lecture today, the lecture is online and activity occurs in the group setting, in the classroom. This is blended learning. It's been popular in many parts of the world until now. Of course, now the young people are not even able to go to the classroom for that activity. So to combine independent and group learning, now this must also be done at a distance. So our student is reading his, he's on his learning management system, learning, reading his texts and his YouTube, taking part in a MOOC, massive online open learning course. But he's also linked now through communication technology to a group which is formal, set up by the teacher, or an informal group that he set up himself. Students from his own village or his own country or 5 countries around the world. Assisted, guided by the person you may call the teacher. In the old days, perhaps you can call the person a tutor. Some people would call the person a coach. I'm happy to call that person the teacher. He's able to go out and take a test or an exam when he wants, and as I said earlier, he can repeat that until he achieves the learning outcomes that are set in the objectives for the unit of the course or the course itself. Now, this is not new, of course. This mixing of distance education and face-to-face, I've shown here the British Open University, probably the most famous of the distance teaching universities. And if you know, I'm not sure if you can read it, but it says there on their splash page, it says, you get everything you need to study the course at home, and you get support from a personal tutor on the phone, online, or at group tutorials. Before virus, they would arrange people to meet in, for example, public libraries or other places that were geographically convenient for the students. The experience of these open universities, by the way, I think could be of enormous help to educational institutions that are now trying to understand how to blend face-to-face and distance learning methods. In fact, I've wondered, I almost wrote a letter to the newspaper the other day to say, why in Great Britain don't they just hand over all higher education to the Open University and let them run it for the country, because they know how to blend online learning with group tutorials, or even if it's not possible to have real face-to-face, they can manage virtual group tutorials. They know how to do it, but I didn't write a letter because I don't think the politicians will listen, but that's another story. And I just want to point out there's no dichotomy between these two these two sets of resources. The online, the classroom group is just one of many resources that should be used in the educator's toolbox. It's just another communication medium along with the other communication media. It's a medium that, like other media, should only be used when it is the most efficient medium for accomplishing defined learning objectives. Unfortunately, it's become the default medium that teachers just assume you have to have the face-to-face group or even the virtual group, when in fact, that may not be the most effective or efficient medium. And so I think of the group as a face-to-face, the group as another medium, and it must be selected according to what the learning objectives, what the learning objectives are. So now I hear you say, yes, that's all very well, but it's unfair to teachers, because how could a teacher manage all the tasks that I've been talking about? How can they develop a study guide online and learning objectives and learning tasks and make a podcast and YouTube and do the testing, manage the group activities, and give individual attention to every student? How is that possible? And I hear you saying that. The answer is it's not possible, and the system itself must change. This picture shows something very famous in American tradition. It's the little red schoolhouse. In times past, the children came from the village to the little red schoolhouse. They had one teacher who did everything for them. That's still the model that we're working on in higher education all the way down through the system. At my university, 30,000 students get on airplanes and drive to the little red schoolhouse, except it's a very big schoolhouse. But that's the system that we must change if we're, for all kinds of reasons. But right now, under the pressure of the crisis, we have to change it from a 19th century craft into a system that uses managerial and organizational methods the same as in other services, and especially the division of labor. That means having specialists, and then for teaching not to be the work of one person alone in the little red schoolhouse or in the classroom, or in lots of classrooms all next door to each other, but the teaching itself becomes a team process when it's conceived as a system and not as a craft, as in the past. This is also not a new idea. Here's the man who invented the idea of teaching as a system, an American professor, University of Wisconsin, in the middle 1960s, who said, what would happen if we break teaching down into its different components and then reassembled them as a system with lots of different experts working together as a team. So he said, if we had instructional designers as well as content experts and audio video producers, editors, software designers, evaluators, and tutors, and so on, linking all together with all the different technologies, would the product, if you like, the service given to the student not be better than the way that we've been doing it in the past? And he tested that in a project that was called the Articulated Instructional Media Project, and proved that that was the case, that it could be done with better quality, which has always been one of my explanations about distance education. Is it's not simply more convenient, it's not simply more individual, but when it's done right, the quality is better than we can do on our own in the classrooms. And again, you say, well, okay, it's not practical in our system. Right now, we can't do that. And I hear you. Again, you're saying this may be okay in theory, but it's not practical in our school system. So that's why I say change the system. And I've been saying change the system, but believe it or not, I started as a school teacher 60 years ago from this month in England in 1960, not quite 60 years, 1963, almost 60 years. And for many years, I've been saying we need to change the system. And in some places, it's been done. I've already mentioned the open universities. That was a revolution in higher education, but it didn't extend. So we have to change the system. But right now, I just want to make a couple of comments for where you are at this moment. To the teachers, what you can do right now to make the system better for yourselves, especially the university professors, is to study instructional design. And I'm not going to say any more because I know that my colleague and friend, Dr. Tony Bates, is coming on later to talk about instructional design. But I think that's number one. The professors at my university, I don't think any of them have taken a course in which they've studied how to design a lesson. So that's one thing you can do right now. Principals of schools, you could set up teams right now in your own schools. I would hope to see the whole national and regional system change into a total system, but you could set up course teams in your own school, having some of your staff specializing, for example, in instructional design, some specializing in media selection, some specializing in evaluation, and not everybody specializing primarily as a content expert. And very briefly, and I'm keeping my eye on the time here. Very briefly, I'm going to risk quickly sharing a note that I made the other day in response to a different request in a different meeting. What I called some crib notes for teaching online. Crib notes is an American expression, I suppose. It means I don't know, easy things to think of without becoming an expert, without going in detail. And some of you teachers will know this, and I'm going to run through very quickly. Crib notes, what you can do right now, and if you know this, forgive me, but let me just run through. Don't online rely on spontaneity and improvisation. In the classroom, you can walk around and you can speak as you think. Don't do that in an online lesson. You must develop a structure, and you must plan the lesson with chunks of time. I suggest about 15 minutes each. You must have a learning objective. That is a performance that you can observe at the end of the chunk of time, and you need to tell the students what they should be able to do at the end of that period of time. And again, I've said this already, but I think this is the weakest link in the whole pedagogic process. I remember when I was a teacher, I referred to it earlier, I often used to be planning my lesson on the bus as I was on my way to the school. That's not good enough, and it's certainly not good enough online, because it will show. Anything you do badly in the classroom, it will show badly when it's in front of a camera or in some other medium. Tell them how they're going to be tested to show if the objective is achieved. Select the resources that you need to help them achieve that objective. Every resource must contribute directly to the achievement of the learning objective. We say to students, go and read a book. No, that's not. It must be chapter 5, page 3, in order to achieve the objective of this 15-minute piece of chunk, this 15-minute chunk of the lesson. If you make a personal presentation, don't talk for more than 10 minutes. There's no place for social or aimless chat. There can be interaction and discussion, but it must be targeted, planned to meet an objective. Give the evaluation test to wrap up the chunk of time. And if you can't do it within the 5 or 15-minute lesson chunk, you can do it out of class, in other time, and then you'll have to evaluate that in your own time as well. If a lot of students fail the task, you have to repeat the lesson. And if one or only a few fail the task, then you've got to arrange activities for those students in after class time. Now that may be known to everybody who's listening. I think many of the professors don't follow this kind of structured, disciplined presentation. I know most of my professors don't do that. So I thought I would just run through that. It's a systematic thinking, a systems approach, if you will, even to the 45-minute lesson. Although I've been talking more generally about a systems approach to the delivery of education across the whole system. So what's the problem? The problem is that the way the schools and universities are funded and how they're organized, especially at university level, there's an imbalance between the subject specialists and all the other specialists. Especially, there isn't enough investment in the specialists needed for developing courses that require the sophisticated design and communication resources. The budget cycles are too short to allow the longer time that's needed to design and develop distance education courses. The teachers are trained in old methods, not the kind of methods I've been talking about. There is excessive institutional autonomy, and many of you won't like my saying this, I know, but where every institution is fighting for its own interest and not part of a network, of a system, this gets in the way of national or even regional distribution of teaching programs. And so what's needed is a reorganizing of the human and financial resources, both within institutions and between them. That really is the crux of the whole problem. Because whenever I talk to the heads of universities, I know they're thinking about how to maximize the resources within their university, but not how to work with other universities to maximize the total package of resources. When I talk to a department head inside the university, they are willing to do what's needed within their department, but not to give up some resources to share with another department so that the total institutional effectiveness is improved. So that really is the root of the problem, is the distribution and management of the human and the financial resources. And that requires changes in educational policy. And it really has to come ultimately at national level, as well as at local level. But at school level, you can do a certain amount. At local level, you can do certain things. But ultimately, this is for the Ministry of Education and national policymakers to change the way that the resources are distributed in order to move from the old craft little red schoolhouse to the national system. One country where they've made progress on this is the Republic of South Africa. And very briefly, because I'm aware I'm running out of my time, they developed a policy on what they called telematics for education, meaning technology for education, where instead of the faculty based on permanent positions and vertical divisions of faculty, to set up teams that cut across vertical divisions for specific projects, and then allow for the redeployment of teachers, of people to reflect changing needs. As the needs change, so the human resources or the teaching resources are moved around. The funds, instead of being fixed for a year on a line item budget, as is the tradition, that funds are allocated more heavily for the front-end investment that's needed when you're designing technology-based learning, and then being paid off or amortized over the lifetime of a program, not usually with more than 12 months, usually more than 12 months. A couple of days ago, somebody called me and said, I want some help setting up a project because we have to use our money by the end of the budget year, which is next month. So they're looking for something to do to spend the money. That's crazy. If the money could be carried over, then they could extend the development of the program into the next year. But our system didn't allow that. And then evaluation at the moment, it's currently, traditionally, it's measured on the number of students that are in the class and so on, rather than focusing on the performance outcomes. That's in South Africa. It's a policy. It's worked to some extent. Did it work very well? Not entirely. Why? Because of politics, as is the case in the United States, in Great Britain, and probably even in your country. And I've seen it all over this country too, in different states, where systems or changes of that kind are being proposed, and it's usually been a political resistance that stopped the progress. I hope the virus is going to make people think more seriously about these changes. Now, one country, and I've almost finished, almost used my time here, but one country that made a very remarkable progress in that kind of redistribution of resource is Brazil, where they had a great achievement in their teacher education program. The problem they had was a large number of teachers in that very large country needing continuing education, further training, in-service training in the rural areas of that country. So they over 70,000 teachers needed most basic training. As in many less developed countries in elementary schools, many of the teachers have had no training. So that was the problem in Brazil. So the solution was to have a national coordinating group that recruited and managed teams of specialists. You see these subjects I've been talking about for the last half hour. Teams of specialists in both subjects, that's classroom subjects, Portuguese, English, mathematics, science, history, instructional design, back again to instructional design, the various technologies. They used broadcast television a lot in that case, although they used online as well, but because of the rural distribution, some of the technology was quite simple. That's okay. If the design is good, the technology is important, but it's not the more critical of those two sets of variables. For deliver courses at home and in the school with local tutors, and I've referred to the term tutor, you know, the support person before, trained by by state level teacher trainers with performance, which I've mentioned several times in this talk, performance measured weekly by products, by assignments, and with very strict monitoring at all levels, with intervention when needed. I used to say, well, we don't have time to go any further with that. Maybe when we do questions. So the result of that project was in the first year, they trained, first 2 years, the first intake, they trained 27,000 teachers at a total cost of $300 million. You say that's not a lot of money. Remember what I was saying about distribution of money, budgets. 300 million is a lot, but if you focus it on 27,000 teachers, it comes out at just over $1,000 per person, which is very economical with a very good quality program. And it was good because they had an 85% success rate. So that's just one of the few examples where I think a good systems approach has been applied based on a policy of change in both budgetary and human resource. So I'll end up with what I'm going to call the Amazon Uber model for the future. And it's based on what I just told you about Brazil that worked fine, and the South African policy, which was a very excellent policy, and the whole idea of the systems method. The Uber Amazon educational system, as I said about Brazil, has a, well, why do I call it Uber Amazon? Uber doesn't own cars. Amazon doesn't own. I just bought some garden tools from Amazon. They don't produce them, but they connect consumers with those resources that have those services or those products. They connect consumers with companies or individuals who can supply the service locally on demand. And in a post-corona educational system with a core management body and substantial funding, either national or regional or even locally, but at the better the scale, the better, should be able to connect the demand or learning needs of consumers, that is the individual students or the school, to any supplier, national or international, that's able to deliver one or more of the components of a quality learning program. So students would not be limited to the resource in their hometown. That's the little red schoolhouse that I talked about earlier. Schools would have access to a worldwide range of resources, which almost by definition means they would get the best quality because of the competition among providers. And every school or university and every educator can also be, or could be, a supplier and not just a consumer. So I'm just thinking off the top of my head now, if a person in a university by the ocean has become an expert on the seashells of the ocean and teams up with a colleague even in another country who's an expert instructional designer, who teams up with in another part of the country a software producer, and together they make a high quality computer-based program about seashells with high quality instructional design, focus on the objectives and so on that I've been talking about. That professor would be not only the user of programs produced elsewhere, but also could be a supplier of programs delivered elsewhere. And they would be able to develop their unique skills and contribute as specialists. So I think that may be a little provocative, or at least give you something to think about as we wrap up. I know that Uber and Amazon are not popular everywhere, and I thought we might that might give you something to think about. I was an economist in my undergraduate work, and I do still have some faith that the market approach like this can result in quality and lower costs to the benefit of both students, teachers, and taxpayers. So thanks for listening to me. I hope you were able to hear all this. I would just close and say, we know how to provide a better educational system. It may not be exactly the Amazon Uber, but it's got a lot of those ingredients. We know how to use modern technology and to make a more individualized and satisfying learning experience. The heart of a system is that division of labor that releases teachers to pay attention to individual students. Within a program developed by specialists in technology, evaluation, content, instructional design. What stands in the way has been reluctance by many academics and administrators to accept the change in the distribution of human resources and funding within their institutions and across the country. The virus might be the irresistible force that has been needed to shake this complacency. So I leave you to think about that. And if not, do you have any better ideas? Thank you.
So, Dr. Moore, thank you very much for your speech. It was very interesting, and we followed it right from the start to the end. And there are a lot of questions. I don't know where to begin with regarding your speech. I will begin, let's say, with not the easy ones, but the ones that are asking for you to take a position on something. Okay, we have many teachers mentioning that in Greece there was a decision here by the ministry that lessons in schools would be broadcasted, would be live streamed. The question from many colleagues that are following us now is that something that you are for or against it, and if this is a practice that is also followed in the US during this time or in general?
It's a good question. I'll start from the bottom and work up. At the bottom, is it used in? Well, it depends partly what you mean by broadcast. My first reaction was that historically and around the world, providing content information to schools through broadcast, and I think of radio, has been a very common practice, and in some parts of the world still is. So at a second level, I see it as a good thing if it is, depending on the quality of the program that is developed for broadcasting, number one, and depending on it being integrated in a total teaching package, number two. So going back to what I said in my speech, I said the face-to-face class is just another technology that should be used when it is the most effective technology in conjunction with other technologies, such as books, audio recordings, video recordings, real-time video, and so on. The same applies to a broadcast lesson. If it is, sometimes I use the word curated, art museums have people who make selections of what to show. They are the people, the curators. They curate the resources. Whereas educators, we should be working together, of course, in a team. It's too much for one person to do, to carefully curate the material needed in the broadcast, and it should be produced with very high quality, which national broadcasting systems can afford the high quality. It's partly why the British Open University works so much with the National Broadcasting Company. So if the quality of the program is high and and it's designed to fit into the learning package, of course it should be good. However, what often happens is, if you take someone like we're doing this morning, if you put an expert in front of the camera and just have that person talking, well, it fills some kind of vacuum. But I've advocated during this talk that more time and money should be taken to carefully organize what that expert can contribute into the total system with the support and the help of the instructional designer and the media experts. I mean, I've used all the technologies, but I've never been a technology expert. I've always depended on a radio producer, a television producer, or somebody to manage me as the content person. So I'm afraid, my answer is, it can be an excellent resource if it's done right. I don't know if it's being done right or not.
It was a decision that teachers from primary and secondary education teachers should broadcast live from their classes.
Yeah. No, that really isn't good enough. I mean, I was asked to give a talk this week, and I declined to give the talk because essentially they were asking me to do that. That's another story. I won't go there. But I mean, that kind of ad hoc, unscripted, but it takes hours. It takes hours and hours and hours of careful work to design and develop, to script, and really probably to edit and produce a quality program for broadcasting like that. I think that's why in my talk I put in that little piece about virus emergency for doing the lesson. I mean, even the most elementary structure is essential if you're going to be communicating through a technology. Just having a microphone in a classroom and having a teacher talking is not going to produce sustained quality. I mean, one person may do it one time, but it's not, that's not good enough. And unfortunately, we know how to do it better. So I said earlier, I mean, we know how to design and develop broadcast programs that will integrate into a program, into a curriculum, if you will.
Yes, and this exactly brings us to the next question that has been posed, or on the online forums that we have. Is that we're talking about new skills, new competencies that teachers must have, new knowledge. Do you think that the teachers are able to cope with all these new things that they have to deal with? What is your opinion on that? This is another question that has been.
Well, no. I mean, that they can't. The way that they're thinking of it, I think the answer is no. And I hope I made that point in my talk. You remember, I put up the red light. I said, hold on. I mean, I've been advocating. You remember, I put up the picture of Charles Wedemeyer, who kind of invented the idea of the systems approach in education.
Having a whole team of experts, working.
You cannot be most excellent at everything. It's the pre-industrial revolution. When I was thinking about this talk, I was thinking about starting off. I told you I was a student of economics, and in Economics 101 in Great Britain anyway, we're introduced to Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, 1780, I think it was, who explained that if you, instead of having one person making a pair of shoes and another person making a pair of shoes and another person making a pair of shoes, if you divide the process into cutting the leather, shaping the shoe, and putting in the nails, you can get it done faster by having the 3 experts instead of 3 craftsmen.
Yeah.
And it's that simple. That's what Henry Ford said it about making automobiles. If you break it down into its components, you can then produce, you can mass produce. People often then say, yeah, but it won't be as good. Yes, it will be. The quality for the large number of people is better than the large number of people can have under the old system. Now, the aristocracy, they can still get the very best, but that's another story. So no, the teacher cannot in the 21st century be both do the research to keep on top of the content, which is what university professors like to do, and maintain their skill as instructional designers and maintain their skill with the various technologies and be able to evaluate learning for each individual learner, among other skills. So this is the fundamental argument, is we have to change the budget and the human resource management so that some people specialize in some areas and others specialize in other areas. And, we think in our medical system, I mean, we go to what I would say is the equivalent of the tutor, if you will, the person who knows generally, and that person then sends us on to a specialist. When we get into surgery, I hope we don't, but you have a team of maybe 10 or 20 experts working on the patient. This is modern medicine. Take the same principle to travel, and look at all the experts, the specialists that work together to fly me from the United States to Athens. But in education, we're back in the 1800s with a person in a classroom trying to do all this stuff for herself. No, it's not possible. So, I feel sorry for the teacher who's having that pressure. I hope the minister is listening, because it's got to come from the top. There's got to be policy, which is why I showed, the example of the South African case, where at the time of the new government, at the end of apartheid, they had the chance to make a brand new system. And so, I was there, and recommendations were made for some really important policy changes. As I said in my talk, they didn't all take place, again, for political reasons.
Okay. Then I will only ask 2 more questions, and I'm trying to to not to take advantage of the time you're with us. There's a let's say a simple but a very difficult to answer question from one of the attendees, or one of our attendees. Says the question goes like that: how can a teacher, under this situation, manage both students and parents that by default, let's say, are introduced in the learning process, in the teaching process, under this situation. Is that possible, or what does the teacher have to have in mind to take into account?
Explain a little bit more. I'm not quite clear of the question.
Yes, because of the situation that with students and children staying at home, parents are got more involved in the teaching process. Okay, how can it? What is, let's say, which are the points that the teacher has to take into account in order to be able to manage with pupils or students and parents together at the same time?
Yeah. I have 7 grandchildren. My oldest has graduated from college. My youngest is 4 years old. So I have 7 students in my own family. I recognize the problem at a personal level, apart from academic. And I know this is easy to say. I know it's not easy. So let me say what I think is the right thing, but I do know it's difficult. The most important thing is to provide the structure, for the pupil, the structure for the student. And even when I was a counselor for adult students, I used to tell them, you must have a time set aside for your study. You must have a place set aside for your study. And you must develop the discipline. The children go to school when the bell rings, and they stay there until they're let go, or their day is organized into 40 or whatever 40-minute periods. I think the first principle for the parent is to establish the structure for the child, for the student. It's not, the student must not be allowed to say, I think I'll play now, and then perhaps this afternoon I'll do my study, and tomorrow I'll do the study in the morning, but not in the afternoon. The next day I'll do the evening. You have to say, study time is from now until now, and a place. Don't just, if you have a room, dedicate a room. Don't just do the work at the kitchen table and then do it in front of the television and do it in the garden. There should be a time for study and a place for study. And I think that's the most fundamental requirement to get into the perspective, to get into the mindset. I used to tell the adult students, some days when you go to your place and you go to your time, you may not make a lot of progress, but that's okay. You've still got to go there and let everybody know that's your place for study. That's your time for study. The other things the school should be providing some structure in the content. And if they were excellent, from what you heard in my talk, if they have very clear objective for each 15 minutes of a 45-minute session, there'll be the student will be told, this is what you're going to have to learn. This is what you'll have to do afterwards. Now this is how you do it. Now we'll test to see if you can do it. And if not, there should be a loop to go back and go over it again. So the school should provide that kind of pedagogical structure. The parent has to provide the environmental structure. And of course, the emotional support, the encouragement. And fortunate students, fortunate pupils have parents who give them that kind of help and support. Sadly, some children don't. But we would hope that they get the encouragement. But I do think that basic physical time structure is really important.
Good. And then I have one last question that arose more than 5 times that in the time that we speak. But I think personally, I think it's a little bit difficult to be answered or to be to take a position on this. The question is how can distance education, let's say for distance, help students with special needs? Because it's a category of students that suffered very much with during the crisis.
Well, I mean, it's perfect for people with special needs. It's super. Look, when it's done right, it's better for everybody, because everybody has a special need. It's a point I tried to make in my talk. There is no such thing as a class. It's ridiculous. I mean, when you go into a so-called class of 30 people, whether they're adult university students or little children, everyone is different. Everyone has a special need. Everyone has a different personality, a different history. Even a 5-year-old has a different history from the 5-year-old next to her. So I know what you mean. I mean, special need, refer a special reference to persons with physical and other handicaps. And the distance education system is ideal for those people, as well as ideal for everybody. Everybody has a special need. Programs can be designed with alternative. Every program should have alternative routes to the same desired outcome, so that young people can be guided along different pathways. Older people can develop the competence to find their way, to make their own selection of different pathways towards the desired objective. Over and over again, I have to come back to that, because a teacher and the teaching institution, if they don't know where they're trying to go, if they don't know the objective, then nothing, you can't guarantee anything then. But if you know where you're going, a person who's not able to, shall we say, who's visually impaired and cannot read a textbook, one student is told to read the textbook. Well, of course, nowadays they would, but the visually impaired student is told to listen to a recording, just to illustrate the point. In my little story, I said about the student going into the forest to gather specimens for a project. Well, a person who's not mobile wouldn't be able to go into the forest, perhaps. So they would be given a different project. But both projects are aiming at the same learning outcome. So, there's such flexibility within a good distance education system. It's superior for everybody, because everybody has his or her own needs, but it's especially good for people with people who are categorized as having disability.
So it is.
I'm sorry for the person who asked your question. I understand they're being asked to do so much within such a bad. I mean, this isn't a criticism of the Greek system. The American system is equally poorly structured, poorly budgeted, poorly managed to maximize the potential of the distance education system. If we could only reorganize those people and reorganize those budgets under a different policy, we could deliver for every individual a program that was far superior than what we have in the old 19th century method that we're using. It's crazy. It's incredible that we're still back in that system. But around where I am, my university president, he's talking about getting back to normal. He's talking about bringing 30,000 young people back onto campus, wearing masks, sitting in smaller groups, 6 feet apart, and he calls that normal. For heaven's sake. Oh.
So
you have to laugh, because if you don't laugh, if you don't laugh, you cry, because the alternatives are so obvious. But
it is a matter. It is a matter then, as you can say, especially for children with special needs. It is a matter of good design and of using the right educational materials for distance education, as is with everybody.
Yeah.
Good. And I believe that this kind of brings us to Dr. Bates. Also,
it will. It will. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't had any conversation, but we've been colleagues for 50 years. 1970. Yeah, that's 50 years. So I'm sure he'll be able to flesh out some of the broader picture that I've been painting. So I'm going to leave you now. I kind of hesitate to say this, but as I hear myself speaking to you, especially the last question, I feel like saying, go start a revolution. I feel sorry for those teachers. The teacher with the broadcast, the teacher with the person with special needs, the teachers talking to the parents. I really feel for them. I don't know if they could hear me, if they understand what I'm saying, but my heart goes out to them, because they are at the bottom of this dysfunctional system, and it hurts them. And I feel very sympathetic to them. I'm not sure if you're able to communicate that. Yeah. Are people still online? I guess they are.
Yeah. So we would like to thank you at that point. It was very interesting, and thank you for answering all those questions.
Okay.
Dr. Sofos.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Moore, for the holistic approach that you have put in the center of the discussion, and I think it prepares us for a small one revolution, like you say it. Yes.
I used to tell my students, I'm a revolutionary in a necktie. Nowadays, I don't even wear the necktie.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.